All right, we're going to get to this Rams conversation here. Inglewood has voted 5-0 to build to let Stan Kroenke build the stadium. No public vote, no more environmental studies. They're saying shovel in the ground by the end of the year. What does all that mean? We'll talk about that coming up here in just a couple minutes. But first, we have a chance to talk to Susan Scribner. Susan, you are a senior planning associate with the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, and your organization did a census, more or less, of the Jewish community in St. Louis.
That's correct. It's the first community study that we've done of the Jewish community in 20 years.
I moved to St. Louis in 1999, and I, anecdotally only, it seemed to me when I first moved to town that St. Louis had a larger Jewish population than most Midwestern cities. Is that fair? Is that accurate?
No, I think we're pretty much just kind of average 2 to 3% of the population. It might be where you lived or
friends that I became in contact with. Yeah. All right. So this is the first time you did a study like this in 20 years.
20 years.
What'd you find out?
Well, we found out, somewhat to our surprise, that the number of Jews in St. Louis has increased. There was a kind of a conventional wisdom that we used to have about 54,000 Jews, and everybody thought that our population was shrinking. We found that's not actually true. We're up to about 61,000 Jews. We also found out there are more Jewish households, and that's the number of households that have at least one Jewish person in them. But what a Jewish household looks like now is very different from what it looked like 20 years ago.
So there are households where there's one Jewish person. So in other words, a Jewish person married a non-Jewish person.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And when you talk, and that's what you mean by a Jewish household.
Yes.
Looks very different today than it did years ago.
Does. Yes,
Whereas
it does.
years ago, the stereotypical Jewish community or Jewish household was they were all Jewish in that household.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 20 years ago when we did the study, about 1 out of 10 people in Jewish households was not Jewish. Now it's 1 out of 3.
What does that tell? I mean, that just tells you that what? I mean, it's just that's interesting, but what does that tell you?
It tells you that our intermarriage rate has gone way up. It tells you that the traditional ways of interacting with Jewish households and the traditional institutions that we have may not be as ready to deal with a population that has such a large number of intermarried households.
Right. And so, but that's sort of the American way.
It is the American way, right. And we're not any different from any other community. There was a large national survey that came out last fall of the Jewish population nationally, and they found the exact same thing. We're a very assimilated population now.
Very similar to the Catholics or anybody else, right? They're Catholics marry non-Catholics, Catholics marry Jews, and so you have a menorah and a Christmas tree, and
exactly
as you move on. What else did you find from the study that was interesting?
We found that 20 years ago, everybody thought the Jewish population was moving west. We had a lot of friends that I have that grew up in University City, then they moved to Creve Coeur, then they moved to Chesterfield. We found that there are a large number of young adults, especially, who are moving back into St. Louis City, and also that we found Jews everywhere. In the area. We found them in North County, we found them in South County, we found them in St. Charles. So we're a much more dispersed community than we used to be.
What about the age of the Jewish community? Is it getting younger? Is it getting older? Is it staying the same?
It's about the same. The Jewish population has always been a little bit older than the general population. But other than that, we're pretty similar.
What was the overall goal of the survey? Now that you found this out, what was the point of all this?
Well, we really needed to have a good picture of what's going on in our community so that we can plan. We've got 61,000 Jews. We want to engage them and make sure that we have a thriving Jewish community. And this has been very much a community project. We've had individuals from all the synagogues and the Jewish organizations that helped us come up with the questions, that helped give us household information to find Jews in the community, and now we're sharing it with them and talking about what the next steps are, what type of new programs do we have, what kind of new approaches do we need to reach these families that look a lot different than they did 20 years ago.
I have a friend of mine who is Jewish, and every time we go out to dinner, he's kosher, and so we go out and we have, he has a soda, I have a soda, and we end up going out to eat, but we end up not eating because he's kosher and whatever.
Right.
I have another Jewish friend. When we go out, I can't tell you the last time he was in a synagogue. So, but yet he calls himself Jewish, and so I'm in this survey. Did you sort of? And forgive me if this is not the right terminology, but did you do a study on how Jewish these Jewish people were? Does that make any sense?
Well, anybody who identified themselves as Jewish was considered Jewish. There was no litmus test.
Right.
How often do you go to synagogue or anything like that? We did ask people things like, how often do you go to synagogue? Are you a member of a synagogue? Do you light candles at Hanukkah, things like that. And we definitely found that there are fewer people that do those traditional types of behavior, what we used to think of as emblematic of being Jewish.
Right.
But we also found that there are a lot of people that go on Jewish websites or take classes in Jewish subjects, so that there's a lot of different ways of identifying as Jewish.
What was the most interesting thing this survey presented to you?
Frankly, we were just so thrilled to have some good hard data after 20 years. It's hard to pick out just one thing. I guess maybe one thing that was really striking to me is that a little less than half, about 43% of the kids in the St. Louis Jewish community have intermarried parents. So that says, those are a lot of kids that may not necessarily be being raised Jewish. Their family may want something different from a traditional family, and that just asks a lot of questions about how are we going to work with those kids.
You should also note that Ted Drew's frozen custard is kosher.
Yes, it is.
It is very kosher. Yeah, absolutely. Susan Scribner, can people go find this stuff online?
Yes, the whole report and the slides from the presentation we did are online at jfedstl.org. jfedstl.org. Susan
Scribner, Senior Planning Associate with the Jewish Federation of St. Louis. First Jewish study of St. Louisans in 20 years. The big thing is that 61,000 Jewish people live in St. Louis, and that's up 14%.
14%
in the last 20 years.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Susan, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
You got it. And don't forget, McGraw Concrete at Ted Drew's is kosher. I made sure that's